Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today I'm excited to look at a ton of new cards that were revealed. So during the Champions League last night in Japan, they revealed a ton of new cards for our next main set, Temporal Forces, which is going to be coming out in March. And like I said, we got a ton of new card reveals. We have 8 new EX cards, all of which are ancient and future cards. And on top of 8 new EXs, we got another A-Spec card revealed. We got a lot of new ancient and future cards to look at here, and I'm excited to take a look at them. Of course, these are going to be coming out, like I said, in our March set, Temporal Forces, and I'm excited. We got basically the Paradox versions of the Unova Trio and the Johto Trio, and I'm excited to really see what they are going to end up doing, because the more ancient future cards we get, the better, in my opinion. I'll leave a link down below to Poke Beach if you want to go look at these cards yourself and kind of give them a read. Link will be down below. Let's get into it. Starting things off, we have Ganon Fire EX. This is basically the Paradox Entei. This card's actually interesting. So it is a Fire-type Pokemon, and also, keep in mind, it is an ancient Pokemon, meaning that you can play it with ancient cards like Professor Sada's Vitality, which is kind of the main thing that makes this Entei good. So its first attack just does 60 damage, not too bad, and then the second attack is where things get interesting. It does Exploding Flare, which does a nice whopping 260 damage. Now, that's a lot of damage to do, and then it states this Pokemon cannot use Exploding Flare again until it leaves the active spot. So if you want to do the attack multiple times, you got to play a switch card, and obviously you can play switch card, you can play rope. Well, I guess by the time this card comes out, we got to keep in mind rope will be rotated, but you have switch card, and of course, a big one, you got the new prime catcher, which technically does switch. Now, this card does have a pretty easy time attacking, in my opinion. So this card synergizes really nicely with 2 energy acceleration. It works with Professor Sada's Vitality and Magma Basin. So technically, you can power this thing up in a single turn. If you play Professor Sada for 1 energy, you play Magma Basin for a 2nd energy, and then you either attach for turn or energy switch the other energy you may be sodded into play, assuming you put 2 in play. You can power up the Ganon Fire in a single turn and do a turn 1 260 damage attack. That's pretty good. That makes this card a pretty good beat stick. It's pretty strong. Now, it's not like Roaring Moon where it has the ability to like insta-KO anything, which is, I guess, like its biggest weakness. It doesn't have like an insta-KO attack like Moon, but it is still like a turbo kind of Roaring Moon card where you're able to just attack on the first turn of the game if you can pull off the Basin Sada combo, and you're able to just come in swinging with Exploding Flare. Definitely a pretty strong card. I think that it's not bad. I mean, 230 HP, it can be powered up in 1 turn. It's got some good fire support. You can play with like Armor Rouge. You could play this in Charizard. I'm not sure you would though, because Charizard doesn't tend to play a lot of Switch, so you wouldn't really be doing Exploding Flare that much. Next up, we got Walking Awake, which is obviously the Paradox version of Suicune. It is a water-type Pokemon, and it's obviously also an ancient Pokemon. It's got the ability Cerulean Pulse. Damage from this Pokemon's attacks is not affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So it basically has Shred as an ability, which is interesting. And then you have the attack Catharis's Roar. I probably butchered that. For a water and a double turbo, it does 120 damage. If your opponent's active Pokemon is affected by any special condition, it does 120 more damage. So obviously you want to pair this with Brute Bonnet, which poisons your opponent's active Pokemon. So you use Brute Bonnet, poison them, and if you have the 3 energy on, you're doing 250 damage basically with the poison damage included. So you are going to be doing a lot of damage here with the Walking Wake EX. Now, it is actually a lot easier to power up than even Ganon Fire. So what you can do is you can just Professor Sada's Vitality, a water energy on your Walking Wake, and then you can just put a double turbo energy on it, and then you're powering up. Now, yeah, you're going to be doing 220, but 220 damage is still knocking out most, well, 230 technically with the poison, right? But you're still going to be knocking out most basic EXs with 230. So this card actually isn't that bad. Being able to work with a double turbo. It is a water Pokemon. You can play this with, Baxcalibur. I don't think you would, but you could also play it with a Palkia. Palkia could complement this card pretty nicely. You can use Palkia as a way to build up your Walking Wake EX. So definitely not a bad card. There's really nothing that's like weak to water right now, though. I guess like the only matchup that might be good for Walking Wake is maybe Ganon Fire. Just because if Ganon Fire ends up actually being pretty popular, it'll be nice to have a water attacker. But definitely not a bad card at all. It does a lot of damage. It is a bit easier to power up because it only needs theoretically 2 energy. You can play it with Palkia, not a bad card at all. Nice big beat stick, because you'll play with Brute Bonnet for the poison. And then, of course, we got Raging Bolt EX, which is, of course, the Paradox Raikou, the long neck. Now, crazy enough, Walking Wake and Gouging Fire were both water and fire Pokemon, respectively, how Entei and Suicune are, whereas Raging Bolt is a dragon Pokemon, which is a little crazy, right? Yeah, obviously, you would have expected Raging Bolt to be a lightning type because Raikou, but no, it's a dragon type. It's a dragon type Raikou, and it is an ancient Pokemon. Ancient dragon types, I think, actually make sense because dragon Pokemon tend to use multiple energies in their attack cost. So you have 2 attacks. You got Bursting Roar. Discard your hand and draw 6 cards. Not bad if you need like a little early game refresh. It's not the worst attack to have. Now, one thing also to note, I guess, about Raging Bolt, it has 240 HP. This thing is extremely tanky. You can put an Ancient Booster Capsule on it, and you're essentially giving it 300 HP, which is like insane. So that's the first thing I want to note about this card is it is monstrously tanky. It's got 240 HP. But yeah, you got the other attack, which is the main attack, Extreme Ascent, which for a lightning and a fighting energy does 70 damage, and you may discard any amount of basic energy attached to your Pokemon in play. This attack does 70 damage for each card discarded this way. So very reminiscent of Amazing Rare Rayquaza, which did something similar. Now, 70 damage times is pretty strong. If you get rid of 4 energy from play, you're doing 280 damage. It's stronger than what we have with Shenpao and Raichu. Now, this card does, of course, have some decent energy acceleration cards. Now, when this does release, we are going to be losing Flaffy, which was like the first thing I thought of when I saw this card. Oh, it works with Flaffy. Flaffy rotates by the time this set comes out, so you can't play with Flaffy. Flaffy would have been a great partner to play with Raging Bolt. Some other options, though, you can play it with Electric Generator as a way to power up your bench. You can't Generator to the Raging Bolt, but you can Generator to bench Pokemon to get energy in play. You also can play cards like Mirage Gates if you want to play like a Lost Zone Raging Bolt deck, kind of like how you played Amazing Rare Rayquaza, because this card is pretty similar to a Rayquaza. You can play this with Mirage Gate. Another way you can play it, though, is going to be with Sandy Shocks EX. I think that might be the best way to play Raging Bolt, is going to be with Sandy Shocks. I do think that the Lost Zone build also has potential, because you're basically just playing like Amazing Rare Raikou Part 2, but you can also, of course, play this with Sandy Shocks. Now, Sandy Shocks has that ability where, once your opponent's taken, 2 prize cards and they have 4 prize remaining, Sandy Shocks can put energy into play on itself. Counting the fact that Raging Bolt is a ancient Pokemon, technically speaking, you can attack every turn. If you just have like a bunch of Sandy Shocks in your bench, you're putting 3 energy in play, plus Asada, that's 5 energy you're putting into play every turn. And then you can need like attach for turn 2. You're putting a lot of energy in play for Raging Bolt. You can play this with like the Galarian Zapdos to put energy in play. Definitely not a bad card. I think that Raging Bolt is going to be playable. It's a strong card. The fact that it is an ancient Pokemon really does allow its attack to have a lot of synergy. And again, I think the best way to play it is going to be with the Sandy Shocks, but there is some potential in a Lost Zone version of this card where you just play a one-of in a Lost Box deck. You probably have to play like double Mirage Gate plus Raihan to really pop off, but could be really good into like stuff like Charizard EX, where it's just a really good way to just delete it off of the board. But yeah, definitely not a bad card. I think it's pretty powerful, and I'm excited for Raging Bolt because I think it's pretty strong. Next up, we have a Flutter Mane card. Now, we don't have a Flutter Mane EX, which is interesting. Flutter Mane is a very infamously strong Pokemon within the VGC. The Flutter Mane we got, though, it's hit or miss. It's got the ability Fluttering Dust. As long as it's in the active spot, your opponent's active Pokemon has no abilities except for Fluttering Dust. Now, very reminiscent of Klefki and Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet was a little bit stronger, though, because it shut off all of the abilities in play except for Psychic Pokemon. And then, obviously, Klefki only shuts off basic abilities when it's in the active spot. So, Flutter Mane is a bit more of a mid card. I don't think it is very good, unfortunately. I think the ability just doesn't quite get there. Yeah, you can shut off, like, some abilities, like you can shut off Shivery Chill, you can shut off Flower Selecting, which are all pretty relevant abilities to shut off, but I do think Klefki is just a little bit stronger than this card, or maybe it is better than Klefki, but Klefki shuts off all the abilities, whereas Flutter Mane is only the active. It does have Flying Curse that does 90 damage. You put 2 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon anyway, so at least there is an attack for this card. I guess this could be played with, like, Alakazam EX, theoretically. I don't think it's very good, though, unfortunately. I think that, while the ability can be strong, only shutting off the active is a little too niche. I mean, there are going to be, opportunities for that to be good, like, against maybe Charizard, Comfey, like I said, Cramorant. But overall, just not the greatest ability, but it's okay. It's not bad. It could be a new hit-and-run partner, because it's technically stronger than Klefki, and weaker at the same time. It's not all the Pokemon, but it's not just, basics. We got Explorer's Guidance, our first supporter to look at here. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck, put 2 of them into your hand, discard the other card. So you get to look at 6 cards, and you take 2 of them, you discard 4 of the cards. So pretty similar to like kind of Colress, where you're looking at a certain amount of cards, taking those, and then getting rid of the other cards. Also, Sage's Training and Hapu are also very similar. Now, this is an ancient card. Keep that in mind. If there ever is a reason for this to be playable, it is ancient. It is an ancient card. And, same with the Flutter M. It's also ancient. But this card is okay. It might be useful in like turbo-based decks. Maybe like Roaring Moon could play it. Gouging Fire, honestly, could probably play this as a supporter too. But again, you already have Sada, so I'm not too sure this card is like that good in like turbo decks. I don't know. Maybe I'm trolling, but it's not a terrible card. But it's just kind of mediocre. I mean, letting you look at 6 cards is a lot of cards to see in a turn, but you're only taking 2 of them. If you're taking half of the cards, maybe be a bit better. Next up, we got Iron Leaves, which the translation is not popping up on PokeBeach, but I do have it pulled up on Twitter here. It's got the ability where once you're in turn, when this card moves from your hand onto your bench, you may switch it in the active spot. If you do, you move any amount of energy from your other Pokemon to this Pokemon in any way you like. And then it has Prismatic Edge that does 180 damage for 2 grass and a colorless energy. So it's got the ability where you can move it from the bench to the active when you play it down. So it's like Weird V, though Weird V I think can work at like any point. I think this card you have to play it down. It's like Tapu Koko GX from back in the day, and that was a decently playable card. So not a bad ability. Obviously, you have to put energy into play. Now, this is a future Pokemon. We're kind of getting into the future stuff now. This is a future Pokemon, not an ancient Pokemon, so you don't have that immediate Professor Sada's Vitality, and it does require grass energy. Now, there are a few ways to power it up. The first way is maybe with like Fortress and Gardenia's Vigor. Those are probably going to be the 2 best ways to put energy into play for this card. Unfortunately, Cherim does rotate. And honestly, this card is just kind of mediocre. It is a nice grass attacker, and keep in mind there are going to be some new future cards in the set that might synergize nicely with Iron Leaves, but it only does 180 damage, and then it makes it so the Pokemon can't even attack next turn, which is kind of awkward. It is nice to have another grass type that can maybe deal with Charizard EX, but overall, I think Iron Leaves is just kind of mediocre. Nothing too crazy going on. Next up, we do have Iron Crowniax, which I think is the best new Unova Pokemon, a future whatever. Yeah, so it is a future Pokemon, and it has an ability, Cobalt Commander. Your future Pokemon's attacks, excluding Iron Crown EX, do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So the first thing you might notice is that is basically like Deoxys EX from way back in the Plasma days. Now, Deoxys EX did something extremely similar where it made your Plasma Pokemon do 10 more damage, I think it was, or it was 20. It was one of the two. But either way, this card is basically just a new version of the Deoxys EX. And there's actually a world where we might even start seeing future, Plasma hybrid cards where maybe Colress's Experiment's going to come back. Maybe we'll see stuff like that. Plasma, like, energy with future energy. I think we're due for a future and an ancient energy for the record, so I think that will be coming. Because it makes sense. I mean, we just literally got a spiritual successor to, like, Deoxys EX. And then Iron Hands EX is extremely similar to Lugia EX, because it did the same thing where you take an extra prize for killing something. So, future Pokemon are very similar to what Plasma Pokemon might have been back in the day. So, it does have the attack Twin Shuttles that does 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. Nothing too crazy. I mean, it does require 3 energy to do 50 to 2 Pokemon. I don't think it's the greatest attacker ever. This card, if anything, is just going to sit on the bench and allow you to do more damage. But the ability is strong. I mean, now all of a sudden, Iron Hands can do even more damage. Keep in mind, there's also the Future Booster Capsule that makes you do 20 more damage too. So all of a sudden, you're doing, like, potentially 60 more damage out of nowhere. You're hitting even higher numbers with your future Pokemon. We'll have to wait and see what other future Pokemon we get. Because right now, there's, like, Iron Hands. There's Iron Valiant, I guess. But that's a deck that you would rather just use Iron Valiant at that point over just spamming Iron Crown. But not a bad card at all. Next up, we have Iron Boulder, which probably is the weakest of the bunch. It is the future version of Terrakion. It does have the attack Repulsor Axe, which for a fighting and a colorless energy does 60 damage. And if this Pokemon takes any damage from an attack during your opponent's next turn, put 8 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So kind of like Lycanroc, EX, where you do the attack, you take the damage, you put damage back. I mean, 80 damage is a decent bit of damage. You're only doing 60 damage, so are you really going to reliably do 60 damage to take 80 back? And then your other attack, Power Stomp, does 200 damage and then discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. Now, you can, of course, pair this with cards like Gutsy Pickaxe to, try to build it up. There's obviously Koraidon EX that can accelerate energy to it. It's okay. You can play with Garchomp EX too. I guess that's the other thing. It is a future Pokemon. You can play it with Future Booster Capsule. You can play the Iron Crown to do more damage. But you're only doing like 200 base. You'd have to like 2 Iron Crowns to do 240. I don't know. It's okay. It's not that great of a card though. Fighting Pokemon just aren't very good right now, and unless we get like a really good fighting Pokemon card that makes fighting Pokemon playable. Because right now we just have Gutsy Pickaxe and like Garchomp, which they're not terrible options, but it's just probably not going to be enough to make Iron Boulder super playable, unfortunately. We got Iron Thorns, baby, the basic Tyranitar. Hopefully we get an EX of this, because obviously T-Tar is pretty popular. It does have an attack, Destro Press, which for a Lightning and a Colorless does 70 damage. Reveal the top 5 cards of your deck. This deck does 70 damage for each future card you find there. Discard the future cards you revealed, and then shuffle the others back into your deck. So, kind of reminiscent of like the Kingdra I just did a video on, where you look at the top cards of your deck and reveal all the energy. This time, you're specifically revealing future cards. Now, there are a lot of future cards to choose from, so the way to play this is maybe in like a future toolbox deck where you just shove a bunch of future cards in your deck. This Pokemon is a lightning type. You can play it with Electric Generator, and you're just able to swing for a ton of damage. I mean, 70 times isn't bad. I mean, 5 energy is 340 damage or 350 or something. Just a lot of damage to be doing with Iron Thorns. Definitely not a bad card. We just have to figure out a way to consistently be discarding those future cards. Because the other thing, too, is you discard the future cards, you can't get them back. So it's not like Energy where you have, like, Energy Recycler and Rod. But I guess by the time this would come out, Recycler rotated. But either way, we got to figure out a way to put those cards in the deck. I guess you can get rid of Pokemon and you can play, like, 4 Super Rod. Because thankfully, you get to keep the other cards, but you have to only discard the future cards, which is nice. So if you're seeing, like, non-future cards, those cards stay in your deck, which is nice. So not a bad little one-prize attacker. We got Crypt Maniacs Deciphering here, new supporter. Search your deck for 2 cards, shuffle your deck, and then put those 2 cards on the top of any order. So basically, this is just Mallow, and Mallow was a very playable card back in the day. Now, a card like this could be really good with something like Refinement Curlia, where essentially you're putting 2 cards on the top of your deck, and then you can use Refinement to draw into the 2 cards that you put on top of the deck, which makes this card actually pretty playable. I actually kind of like this card. I think that a Curlia engine with this card actually is pretty good because you can immediately grab them. You could play it with like Bibarel, I guess. It's like another way to see 2 cards. You can like Bibarel Skwovet into these 2, but I think it's kind of better with like Curlia, but I do like it in general. I think it's a pretty strong card. Potentially rotation Gardevoir, maybe we'll play this because Curlia just synergizes really nicely with a card like this. Yeah, it's a pretty strong card. There isn't a Ranguru anymore. If we still have the Primate Wisdom or Ranguru, would be pretty good. I mean, you're only getting the 1 card you put on top of the deck, but that's still pretty nice. But yeah, definitely not a bad card at all. I actually think it might be playable because that's a really strong effect, and Mallow infamously saw a lot of play back in the day. We've already looked at Prime Catcher and the Neo Upper Energy, but we do have some new starter decks, including some more ancient future Pokemon and a brand new Miraidon and a new Koraidon EX. So the new Koraidon EX here is a Dragon Pokemon. And I think for once, we actually got a better Koraidon than a Miraidon, which is kind of cool. So it's got the attack Vengeful Hammer, which for 2 colorless energy does 20 damage for, and then 20 plus 10 more damage, sorry, for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So thankfully, it is an ancient Pokemon, which is kind of the selling point. So you can put a capsule on it, give it 290 HP, and then in total, you can do like 300 damage if this thing has 280 damage on it. Its main attack ain't bad either. Kaiser Tackle for 3 fighting energy does 280 damage, and this Pokemon does 60 to itself. So that's a really strong attack. 280 damage is a ton of damage to do. That is a very powerful attack that, for the most part, is going to knock out most of the EXs, and even at that point, you're one-shotting V-Star Pokemon like Arceus and Palkia, and with like a Cleansing Gloves, you're knocking out Gardevoir EXs. So not a bad attacker at all. It's an ancient Pokemon. You can easily build it up with the capsule. It does require a Fire and 2 Fightings, however. I think I said 3 Fighting earlier because it said FFF, but yeah, it's a Fire and 2 Fighting. But again, it plays with like Gutsy Pickaxe, plays with the other Koraidon. Not a bad card. I actually think this is pretty solid. Then we got a great Tusk single prize ancient Pokemon with the attack Angry Charge that is 80 damage. If your bench Pokemon have any damage on them, you do 100 more damage. Not bad. 180. Combine this with Gapejaw Bog, obviously, or combine this with Gengar. Not a terrible one-prize attacker. Again, it is ancient. You can power it up pretty easily with Professor Sada's Vitality. It works with double turbo, which is nice. Not a bad card either, because you can play with like Gengar, right? So we got a new Sandy Shocks one prizer. It's interesting that like we're getting a Great Tusky X and a Sandy Shocks EX that are all ancients, and then we get the single prize versions. It's got Magnetic Blast for 1 fighting energy, does 20 damage. If you have 3 or more energy in play, this attack does 70 more damage. So you do 90 damage for 1, and then your other attack does 60. So not too crazy, not that playable of a card. You don't even hit for weakness. If you hit for weakness, it'd probably be a bit better. We have another Screamtail. Now, this is not like the Screamtail we got, thankfully, because this one is a little bit weaker than the Screamtail we already have in the format. It's got Songful Encouragement that does 100 damage, or it heals 100 damage, sorry, from one of your benched ancient Pokemon. Not bad. I mean, healing isn't terrible, but overall, not that great of a card. Thankfully, it's not as good as the other Screamtail we have. And we got the new Miraidon EX. And like I said, for once, I think the Koraidon is better than the Miraidon. This is a Dragon-type Miraidon. Like I said, this is the third Miraidon and third Koraidon EX we now have. Now, this Pokemon being a Dragon-type does mean it requires a Lightning and a Psychic Energy. It's got the attack Repulsion Bolt, which does 60 damage. And then if your opponent's active already has damage on it, you do 100 more damage. So you can do 160 for 2 energy. Lightning and Psychic, though, kind of an awkward energy cost. I mean, yeah, you can play this with Xatu, I guess, but you're also a Dragon type, so you're not really doing anything special. And then, of course, you have Cyber Drive, which does 200 damage, and then 220, sorry, and then during your next turn, it can't use Cyber Drive. So the only way I could see this being played is like maybe with like Xatu and I guess Iron Crown to try to do more damage, because you're already doing 220. You can Future Booster Capsule for 240, double Iron Crown for 280, Xatu in play to build it up. I guess there is merit to that, but honestly, this I think is just weaker than Koraidon. Koraidon, in my opinion, is obviously just better, because you have natural energy acceleration, you do more damage. Miraidon isn't terrible. It's not, again, not the worst card ever. You technically can play it with all these future cards, and I don't think we've seen every new future card revealed yet, so there's potential this card might get even better cards also, but for now, I think this card is just kind of mediocre, not that good. Or not as good. It's not bad, but not great. We have another Iron Hands. Now, this card, thankfully, is not as good as the Iron Hands EX, obviously. It does have Shockwave, 30 damage, flip a coin of heads. Your opponent's active is now paralyzed. And then you got Super Lully Hands, which for 2 lightning and a colorless does 80 damage. If your opponent's active is an EX or V, you do 80 more damage. So you do 160. I mean, it's an okay one-prize attacker. Nothing too crazy. Again, being a future Pokemon does mean you can play it with the other future damage modifiers, but it's nothing too crazy. We have another Iron Valiant, too. It's kind of similar to Plasma Kyurem. I saw a few people mentioning how the future Pokemon seem to be very much inspired by the Team Plasma mechanic, and Iron Valiant is similar to what Kyurem did from back in the day. So you got Twin Lasers for 1 colorless, does 20 damage, and then 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And then you have Zenblade that does a nice flat 120 damage. So much like, the Team Plasma Kyurem, you're doing, a bit of damage. It's similar. I don't think it'll be played. It is cool, though, to draw the similarities to Plasma Kyurem, though, with Iron Valiant. We have Iron Jugulus, which, unfortunately, they did my boy dirty. They didn't really give Iron Jugulus anything really that good. It's got the ability Auto Fighter. If it's in the active spot, takes damage from an attack. You put 3 damage on the attacking Pokemon. I mean, yeah, it's a nice ability, I guess, but, this card only does 110 damage, so it's not really doing that much damage, unfortunately. Again, they did my boy Iron Jugulus dirty, bro. My favorite Pokemon turned Paradox, and they give it another crappy card. When will they ever learn? Hopefully we get an Iron Jugulus EX, by the way, that ends up seeing play. I can only hope and pray. All right. And finally, we got the Master Ball reveal. So Master Ball is getting a reprint, so it is an A-Spec card, but Master Ball was already a card that existed as an A-Spec in Expanded. So it just basically lets you search your deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, put in your hand. That's it. You just grab a Pokemon in your deck for free. Any Pokemon, Stage 1, Stage 2, EX, V-Star, VMAX, anything. You grab it for free with the A-Spec. Now, is it better than Prime Catcher? No. Prime Catcher is always going to see play over Master Ball. There are going to be niche uses. Like, being able to get a Pokemon is nice. You can obviously play this with Arven, meaning that Arven, instead of grabbing Ultra Ball, you can just go Master Ball instead, which makes this card, semi-playable to a degree. But, I mean, grabbing a Pokemon, well, it is strong, and obviously we are losing some Pokemon search cards, like Battle VIP being a big one, Fall Crystal, Level Ball are rotating. I mean, I still don't think Master Ball is that good. Overall, Prime Catchers is better. See, that's the issue with Prime Catcher. That's why in my last video I said Prime Catcher might be bad for the game, because we get a card like Master Ball back, where it's if Master Ball was the only other ace spec or prime catcher was like a little bit different and wasn't that powerful, there's a world where you would have kind of a crossroads between what ace spec you want to play. The problem is, because Prime Catcher is like one of the best items we've ever seen, you're never going to really choose Master Ball over Prime Catcher half the time. So, on like 90% of the time, you're just going to go Prime Catcher over Master Ball or Neo Energy. I mean, you could probably choose Neo Energy over Master Ball, though. I think Master Ball is like bottom of the spec tier list right now, between Neo Energy and Prime Catcher. But so that's the issue, man. They kind of shot themselves in the foot by printing a broken ace spec card because all of a sudden there's no reason to play Master Ball when Prime Catcher is just always a better card. So it is what it is. It is cool to see Master Ball come back. We'll see if they get or we get any more new ace spec reveals. Maybe we'll get Computer Search or Daz Machine back. If we get another ace spec that rivals Prime Catcher, I guess that's a good thing because like Prime Catcher is just OP. So we'll have to see. But there you have, folks. That is all of the new card reveals. Again, we got a ton of new ancient and future cards to look at. Some of the highlights. I'm a big fan of the Crypt Maniac card. Koraidon, I think, is actually pretty playable. I also really do like the Iron Crowniacs for what that could be for future Pokemon. And then I think honestly, all three of the Johto Paradox Pokemon are better than the Unova Paradox Pokemon, which is kind of funny. I think that the best one maybe is Raging Bolt, though I do think that Walking Wake and Gouging Fire are also fairly strong cards. Keep in mind, ancient Pokemon might be better than future Pokemon right now. Well, future Pokemon seem to have that extra bit of damage potential. The ancient Pokemon have the consistency of energy acceleration built in. So we'll have to see what other ancient future cards we get revealed. There's a good chance the future Pokemon are going to be similar to what Plasma Pokemon did. We might see a Colress Machine type reprint. But I hope you all enjoyed the video here on the second channel looking at all of these new cards. I'll leave a link down below to PokeBeach if you want to go check them out yourself and kind of gauge your own opinions. I'm sure we're going to see more reveals soon, and I'm excited for all of the new cards getting revealed. Again, this is going to be in our March set, so we have a bit of a ways to go. We have about 3 months until the set comes out, but nonetheless, it is going to be exciting to see what else gets revealed. And yeah, that'll be for me. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like, subscribe down below. We're on the road to 10,000 subs. We're getting very close, so make sure to subscribe down below. Be appreciated. So yeah, catch y'all later. Bye-bye.